Like any war, this war is complex. War is never an act of one person. It is never a decision of one person. It is always a lot of different historical events that had an impact for decades and sometimes for centuries. It is even more complicated when we're discussing war between former empire and former dominion. It is even more complicated when not everyone perceive Russia as a former empire. So when I was writing the story, my idea was to create a more kind of simplified answer why this war is complex, and kind of give you a bit of understanding how you can understand Ukrainians, but also this is something that I try to do as much as possible. I was trying to make Ukrainian history more appealing, more interesting, and more fascinating. So after this story, after this short story, you as a reader would have desire to know more about Ukraine, because I think this is something that all people who lived through the war experienced. We are very scared that people will just forget about us, or will have this overall idea about Ukraine is just, this is just a country with a war. So when I was working with Ivan and Yulia, it was, I think, one of the best cooperation that I had with other artists. Everything was smooth. Something that I understood as a kind of one of the most important thing when you work as an artist. It is the trust of the person that's working with you. The more you try to control the process, and the less you trust the artist, the more complicated and less good the outcome will be. But to be honest, it's not like something that I needed to change in my mind when I was working with Yulia and Ivan. From the very beginning, when I saw their drawing, when I saw their style, I knew for sure that I will just trust them. So most of the time when I was describing the frame, I kind of make a small note everywhere that this is just my idea for a presentation of the idea, but I'm open to anything. And this is something that I was telling them from the very beginning. I trust you. So if you have a better idea, if you have some crazy, what you might think is crazy idea, I'm always open to it. Because again, I think the trust is crucial here in the process, in the art process. So yes, I think this is one of the reasons why we have such a beautiful graphic novel, because there is a lot of trust, and of course skills of the both illustrators are just incredible. So the problem is that a lot of people think that Russian propaganda can impact them or affect them only if they are in Russia, or only if they read Russian materials or Russian sources. And exactly this statement, this confidence makes them even more vulnerable to Russian propaganda. It was very important for me to try to explain that Russian propaganda is not working only with the current events. It also changed the perspective of the history. And as Edward Said said, that it is even more important how we perceive the history rather than the reality of the history. And this is exactly what Russia was doing. So by telling the story from the Middle Ages, because of course I couldn't do, the whole time, it was also kind of act to bring the agency back to Ukrainian voices and describe our vision, and something that was not there, since for the long time Russian voices and Russian version of the history, changed version, was more loud or was more popular in the world. So I thought that it is crucial to have some of the understanding what exactly in the history of Ukraine was changed by Russia. The perception of what historical events was changed by Russia, and how these changes actually led us to towards Russian aggression. How what Russia did and how Russia changed the history before, how it is was part, how it was the part of Russian propaganda that we see now. That was the reason why I decided to talk about history, not only about current events. Since my father and both of my brothers, they were born in Afghanistan, I knew about the fact of the war, that war was embedded, connected to reality from the very young age. So it was not a big shock for me, as it might be for someone, that there is countries, there are people that are living in the war all the time, and they don't even know what does it mean to have a peaceful sky above their heads. I always had this idea that war is not something abstract somewhere far away. It is real people. It is real lives and real experience. It's not just a article or some piece of the weekly news. This is real stories, and I think that's why the empathy that I felt like people don't have enough. I think that was something that I always try to convey, try to talk about, that this is actually real people and real stories. And this is something that I also add to our stories. That's why I decided to make not the one storyline that will describe a history and historical background, but also include the basic reality, the everyday reality of millions of Ukrainians. Because I thought that that might give you understanding of everyday life and kind of make this connection a bit easier. So yeah, I think my personal background kind of makes it easier for me to be able to describe that war is always a personal event, because I got this knowledge from the very, very, very young age. We as a society overall, not only Ukrainians, but we as well, had not a right image of Russian culture and Russian history for a long time. This is not very common to acknowledge that Russia was an empire and still has a lot of imperialistic ideas that, of course, shaping the culture, shaping the political system and political values right now. That's why it is very important. For empires, it always was important to conquer. This is how you survive again as an empire. You always need to become bigger and have more influence. So since Russian colonialism is not overseas colonialism, but settler colonialism, it is much harder to acknowledge and also see exactly what Russia was doing towards all the neighboring countries, specifically those one that were part of the USSR. It is something that I try to express in the story by telling how Russia used the religion, how Russia used even the wording. Even wording itself is very important, because again, Russia decided to have the image of the empire in 18th century, and it was very important to even use the right wording that was actually connected to Ukraine and Ukrainian history. The same with the language. I also try to describe that in order to be great, imperialistic cultures need to destroy something, but they need to replace with their own culture something that were there before. And this is, in case of Ukraine, and subtle colonialism, language is one of the most important parts of Russian cultural war. And to be honest, it's not only for Ukraine. You also can see that in Belarus, you can also see that in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and it was also in Georgia. To be honest, I think it was in every country of that were in was in Soviet time. So I was trying to, in the story, I was trying to describe how exactly Russia was changing the history all the time, and how it is very typical for empire state thing to do: change the history, change the narrative, and show that everything is about them, not about someone else. Because destruction is one tool that empire use all the time. The war is much closer than it seems, and it is very hard to acknowledge that. And also, a lot of Ukrainians, me included, we were delusional about the fact that full-scale invasion might happen, even though we had war for quite some time at that point with Russia. But the moment when full-scale invasion started, it also kind of start to have very important question in your head: why you were so delusional, why it was so hard for you to acknowledge that full-scale invasion, that bombs falling from the sky, is actually very, very possible reality. So the distance between the peaceful reality and the bomb shelters is actually very, very, very small. So I think this is something that I also try to express in the story. I have other projects. Right now I'm working on the book about decolonization. That book, the idea of the book is to make a personal manual of self-decolonization for each person who want to break, cut the ties with the empire. To be honest, I don't think that this book will be helpful only for Ukrainians. I think this is something that a lot of different people could find useful. And yeah, that's it. It is very important to understand that imperialism is a very, very structural concept. It is everywhere, in other words. So it is very important to the institutions and teachers to understand two things. First is that we need to review our relationship with the Russian culture, and we need to acknowledge the imperialistic background, the imperialistic basis. Second, do we pay enough attention to other cultures, specifically Ukrainian one? Because this is a thing that happens after full-scale invasion. There were not enough of people who understand, outside of Ukraine, who understand Ukraine, because most of the time Slavic studies were focused on Russia. It was Russian studies. So it is very important to acknowledge this problem, and also to realize that we actually need people who understand that geographical area, and do not focus only on Russia. Because by focusing only on Russia, we kind of could forget what exactly Russia destroyed or tried to destroy or in process of destroying. So I think the reviewing of the Russian narratives and Russian history and Russian culture, this is very meaningful. And second is, of course, reviewing the history and the perception of the cultures of the neighboring country to Russia. Thank you.